Hello and welcome to another tech tip by VMNerd. Our tech topic for today is configuring a CA or certificate authority for your pFSense firewall. This will enable you to have a trusted, secure encryption method between your workstation and whatever endpoint you wish to establish secure communications. I also plan to go over a few deployment strategies for getting the root and chain certificates to your endpoint devices. And with that, let's get started. Okay guys, what I'd like to do to get started, let's go ahead and build out a visual representation of what it is we're trying to achieve. Okay, let's see, get the orientation, make it user friendly. Okay, so right here I'm going to depict our pFSense firewall. Okay, and our purpose here, we're actually going to build a root certificate. Okay, go ahead and make a couple copies of this stuff here. Okay, and then we'll have our intermediate CA. And then below that, this is where we'll typically have our web service or certificate, website, or basically anything that really requires a certificate, whether it be user-based or machine-based. Okay, so now let's explain what these really are. So a root certificate is typically a certificate type that establishes your initial chain of trust. And these are the type of certificates that you typically will find in browsers and computer PKI stores that say, I trust that certificate authority and anybody he trusts. Okay, so companies out there that do sign certificates, typically they have a charge or a fee associated with that because they have expenses for getting these certificates actually installed into operating systems, browser areas, and things like that. An intermediate certificate is another type of certificate authority that those companies that pay the money to get their stuff included into operating systems, this is where they start their chain of trust, because getting the root certificates actually deployed out to the operating systems could be costly. And so to minimize any costs and expense associated with that, they'll create an intermediate certificate authority. So, and it's just a good practice anyways, because if you do have a root certificate authority, you don't want that thing to get compromised. So traditionally what people do is they build their root certificate, and then their root certificate authority, and then they'll actually shut them down. So that way people can't access it in any way, shape, or form. And all they need is just that initial certificate that does the initial signing for their intermediate certificate authorities. Okay, and people that do leave them on, they obviously take a risk of getting compromised. But, it doesn't happen very often. So it happens, but just not very often. And then, of course, the intermediate certificate authorities are where, like when you and I would go out and procure a certificate of some sort, this is typically what we would buy down here for our website. We would actually get ours signed by an intermediate certificate authority. So inside this particular, what we're doing here, we have a machine. We'll call this just the 10 box, and you'll see why. And then, of course, the machine that we're currently running on, which is, I'm not even sure what I called it, maybe my demo workstation. Okay, and then inside that, this guy here is actually joined to an Active Directory domain. Okay, we'll just call it Active Directory. Oh, thank goodness for spell check. Okay. Okay, so, these guys, he trusts him. And from here, I'll actually connect to the firewall. And then this client here will actually leverage the firewall to get to the internet. Okay. we'll go ahead and move him up. This is how he gets to the internet, and then our machines here, they actually connect. From here, they go straight to the internet. We'll just create another box, call it internet. Okay. So from here, I connect here to go to the internet and stuff like that. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we can create as a set of certificate authorities. Okay. So if you watched our previous videos on creating pFSense firewalls, then these numbers here should look fairly familiar. 192.168.30.220, which is a VIP to our pFSense firewall. So go ahead and actually let's take a look at the error that we just got. And the error was saying, basically, this is an unrecognized or an untrusted certificate that you're trying to connect to. Well, I mean, typically when we get to a pFSense firewall, we don't think anything of it, but technically, yes, we do not trust it. Our machine itself does not trust this certificate. Okay, so let's take a look at that. And if you look right here, this is actually generated by the pFSense server itself when you go to do the install. Okay. Okay, so anyways, you see the certificate who is issued to, who it's issued by. Let's go ahead and log in. Okay, and we don't need to save anything. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into System and go to the Cert Manager section. And let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and create our certificate authorities because we're going to need these anyways. So let's go ahead and create an internal certificate authority. And this one here, we'll call it VMNerd -root -ca. Okay. And yeah, that's fine. State is California. City is Los Angeles. And for organization, we'll do VMNerd CA at demo.vmnerd.com. And then for name, this is what's actually going to be advertised on the certificate, is the common name, which in our case here, we're just going to call it VMNerd root CA. So if you look right here at the certificate, this is the actual issued by name that we'll see. And when we click on the path, this is what we should see. Okay, so we'll go ahead and call it that. We'll click Save. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new certificate, and this time it's going to be an intermediate certificate authority. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll actually call this sub 1 for subordinate or intermediate. Okay, so we'll type in the same information, so CA. The one thing, you make sure you select the right signing certificate authority. In our case, that's where we did our root CA. And city is Los Angeles. And organization is VMNerd. CA at demo.vmnerd.com. And keep it simple. We'll just do a copy and paste because copy and paste is your friend. Save. Okay. And let's go ahead and download these certificates. Okay. So go ahead and download this guy. Save. And we will download this guy as well because we're going to need him for part of the distribution method, a way of deploying the certificate to your machines. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is actually, let's go ahead and create a certificate, one that will leverage the certificate authority. So in this case, we're going to call this guy firewall.demo.vmnerd.com. And where it says certificate authority, you're not going to want to select the root. Instead, you're going to click the subordinate. Okay, and then for type of certificate, let's go ahead and use server certificate. Because typically when you are generating them for websites and things like that, they're typically server certificates. Some websites actually use authentication methods like your email address or just some way to say who you are. And that's when you'll probably select the user-based certificate. And the other thing to note too is that your user certificate and your server certificate are stored in different trust stores on your machine. Okay, but let's go ahead and create the common name for this guy. So he'll be firewall.demo.vmnerd.com. And then down here where it says alternative name, this is a great opportunity to inject IP addresses. So one of the nice things about having your own certificate authority is this particular piece here, is that you can actually create your own you can actually add IP addresses. If you actually go to a provider today and you say, hey, I need these what they call private IP addresses, they're going to tell you no, because they can't prove that you as an individual own them. So just keep that in mind, an advantage to actually having your own certificate authority. And then for our second IP, we'll do 31.254, which is our gateway on the inside LAN for this particular firewall. Okay, so we'll go ahead and click Save. And you'll see our certificate in there. And let's go ahead and export this certificate as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and open up, let's minimize all that stuff, just so that way you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. Let's go ahead and open up our MMC, and let's go ahead and add the certificates piece, but instead of using my user, let's go ahead and select computer, because this is typically like if you're installing web servers and things like that, this is where you're going to want to put your certificates. Okay. So let's go ahead and open that up. And if you look right here, you see personal. This is where you would find like your firewall type certificates. And then the trusted certificates is where you're going to find the root certificate authorities. So in our case, we'll actually find this one in here when we get to that point. So if we click on it now, we actually don't trust it. Therefore, it's going to show that this red little X. So if we ever go to a site that's associated with that, we will get the error messages. Okay, so let's go ahead and log into our Windows 10 machine, at least our demonstration one that we're going to use here. So I want you guys to actually see, I want to go ahead and manually install these so that way you can see what it looks like manually installed. At least on a machine, it'll be manually. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and just make sure that they're not there. So you guys can see, and then we're going to go download the certificates from the firewall. Okay. And if you look right here under Trusted Root Certificate Authorities, there's not one that says VMNerd, and then for intermediate, same thing. Okay, nothing. Okay, so let's go download the certificates. Remember, it was 31.254 since this is the trusted side. Okay, and again, we still don't trust it yet. But by the time we're done, we will. Okay, okay, so certificate. Let's go ahead and, I mean, realistically, all we really need to do is download this, just the root. That's the only one we really should have to trust. But I want you guys to see the trust path, if you will. I want you guys to see that on a machine. You know, if you're ever installing like a web server certificate, or if you have a machine, a user-based certificate, you actually need to make sure that your machine itself actually trusts the full path, even if it's not in there. So I want you to see what that looks like as well. So, okay, so we'll go ahead and download the certificate as well. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and switch out the pFSense certificate with the firewall one. Okay, and this is where we go select the SSL certificate, and you'll actually see the new one that we created, the firewall.demo.vmnerd.com. Switch that over, bring it down, do a save, and click OK. And in a few minutes, we'll come back to this. Okay. So remember before I was talking about, so here's our actually web server certificate. If you look, there's an explanation, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the trust itself isn't fully configured or set up. Even though the certificate itself has its chain of trust, this one here does not. So the first thing we need to do is we actually need to go ahead and install the root certificate. Now, for the demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you multiple ways because of the fact that we have a subordinate and a root. I'm going to install the root through the MMC snap-in, and then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and install the intermediate through just clicking on it and doing the install that way. Okay, so we'll go ahead and click All Tasks Import. By default, it selects the local machine since that's the store I chose in the first place. And then we'll go to the desktop and we'll grab the root certificate. There's no password, and it automatically places it into the right store that you need it in. Okay, so now if we go actually in here and we look at the root, VMNerd root CA, it's actually trusted. There's no red X, no nothing. See, it's fully trusted at this point. And technically, if I wanted to, I can double click on this certificate here, and you'll notice it is also trusted. And the reason why is because we trust the root CA. But we don't actually have the intermediate loaded inside of our certificate store, so we might not necessarily trust 100% what it is saying. But let's take a look. So here's the firewall certificate, and it has a yellow exclamation point, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we haven't trusted the subordinate just yet. So let's go ahead and install this certificate another way. So we'll go ahead and right click, click install, click open. And this is where instead of selecting user, we'll go ahead and select machine, so that way any user on the machine itself can take advantage of that intermediate certificate authority. And then from here, we're going to place all certificates in, at least this particular one, since it's subordinate or intermediate, we need to put it into that certificate authority area. Okay, go ahead and click next, finish. And now if we double click on our firewall certificate, it should show as trusted, because the full chain of trust is in our trusted certificate authority areas. So the subordinate is trusted by us and the CA itself. And if we actually go to the firewall URL, which is 192.168.31.254, or you can type it in. And if you look here, we actually don't get that red X anymore. Okay, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that certificate is fully trusted. We trust the subordinate, we trust the root. Okay, so now that we did all that, we see that it works, we see that the trust is there. We can actually type in, let's go ahead and just type in the URL as well. So firewall.demo.vmnerd.com, and we get the same thing. And a lot of that has to do with the subject alternative names, which I think I showed you guys earlier, but let's do it again anyways. So right here, if you look here, the subject alternative is actually the IPs. This is an actual advantage of having your own certificate authority. A disadvantage is obviously not everybody's going to trust your root unless you get it signed by a root certificate authority that's already trusted by everyone. And there's ways to do that. Pricey ways, but there are ways. And if you look right here, it's issued by subordinate. And there's the path. Okay, so let's go ahead and show you another method of deploying these certificate authorities to, like on a corporate network, or if you have like a centralized management of your machines, like with Active Directory as an example. So the machine that we're actually doing the recording with is actually joined to an Active Directory domain. Let's go ahead and deploy the certificate via group policy. I'm not going to get too deep into these policies and what they're really used for. Okay, so go ahead and right-click your default domain policy, because I'm not going to create another one. And just note, if you do have domain controllers, they have their own special policy, and the default domain policy doesn't apply to the domain controllers. And a lot of that is because they are a special type of server, and they may have special rules around what they do. Okay, that's typically where your account database is stored and whatnot. So let's go ahead and open it up, the default domain policy. Go ahead and click on security settings, and then there's a public key policy, and then there's a trusted root certificate section. Okay, so if you look right here, let's go back to the root certificate area. Let's do a refresh. This is the machine that was not in the that private network where we were doing it, that Windows 10 machine, this particular one here. That's a glitch. It's not this machine here where it's already defined and loaded there. This is actually in front of the firewall, so this would be like, an internet or untrusted guest. But being an untrusted guest, we're going to actually trust the certificate authority in this particular demonstration. Okay, so let's go ahead and add that actual root certificate here. Okay, so root. Okay, so this is where it gets kind of interesting when it comes to certificate authorities. Because of the fact that the machine itself only needs to trust the root CA, because we don't plan to actually use this firewall.demo for any purposes on this particular machine, we only need to trust the root certificate. The intermediate certificate and any child certificates below that will actually be inherently trusted by our workstation. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh our policies because of the fact that we did make a change. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, close that out, and let's run a GP update /force. And this is basically going to force our machine to go into Active Directory and actually update the local machine and any settings that we just applied via group policy. And this works for 95 to 99% of policies, so this should be sufficient. Some of them may actually require reboots, but for what we're doing, it does not. So remember before how we don't have the root certificate? Let's go ahead and do a refresh. And if you look right there, we do now. We actually deployed it via Active Directory. So anybody who's joined to our domain that is getting policies and actually being, their settings managed by our Active Directory forest or domain, they will get these settings as well since we added it to the default domain policy. Okay, so let's go ahead and go there. Let's go ahead and go to that firewall. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll go firewall.demo.vmnerd. And if you look right there, it's trusted. I mean, this site here is actually trusted by our web browser because of the fact that we trust the root CA. Okay, if we go right here, there's nothing really to trust since we trust the subordinate. Because of the fact that we trust the root, it's inherently trusted. So from here, we actually can't click View Certificate. Well, technically this is a certificate, so you can't view it. So let's go ahead and just take a look at the subject alternative, and everything comes back trusted the way it should and the way we expect it to. Okay, so let's go ahead and try the IP as well. .30.220, and it's the same thing. We trust the certificate, and because of the fact that the subject alternative name is in there, it goes through with no problem. No errors, no nothing. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed our video on configuring a CA or certificate authority for your pFSense firewall, and hope you learned several distribution methods of getting the root and subordinate certificates deployed out to your machines, whether it be a manual or a distributed management model. And have a great day. Hey guys, don't forget to check out our VMNerd YouTube channel for more tech tips.